Life has a way of bringing the right people together at the wrong times. On a small farm in rural Pennsylvania, an old farmer named Walter stands on his porch, holding a final notice from the bank. His family's century-old farm is just weeks away from foreclosure. That's when a beaten-up van pulls into his driveway. Out comes his estranged niece, pushing her teenage son Eli in a wheelchair. The boy hasn't spoken a word since the car accident that paralyzed him 3 months ago. Walter knows nothing about helping a disabled teenager. Eli wants nothing to do with a struggling old farmer. But sometimes the most broken places hold the greatest chance for healing. What will these unlikely companions discover in each other that could change everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's minivan left a trail of dust as it disappeared down the gravel driveway, her rearview mirror catching one last glimpse of her son's rigid posture. Walter watched his great-nephew sitting motionless in the wheelchair, a battered laptop, clutched in white-knuckled hands. The device's cracked screen caught the afternoon sun, a spider web of fractures, much like the ones that had spread across their windshield 3 months ago. "Your room's ready inside," Walter offered, his weathered voice carrying across the yard. Eli's shoulders tensed, but the wheelchair didn't move. The boy's gaze remained fixed on the spot where his mother's van had vanished, as if willing it to return. The old farmer sighed, tucking the foreclosure notice into his pocket. He'd promised Sarah he'd try, but looking at the boy's hollow expression, he wondered if he'd made a mistake. The farm was barely keeping itself alive. How was he supposed to help heal someone else? The screen door creaked as Walter pushed it open. "Kitchen's got fresh lemonade, if you're thirsty." No response. He'd expected as much. The social worker had warned them. Eli hadn't spoken since waking up in the hospital, his words locked away as surely as his legs were paralyzed. Inside, Walter busied himself with dinner preparations, the familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables providing some comfort. Through the window, he watched Eli finally wheel himself toward the house, each movement precise and measured, as if calculating the exact force needed to navigate the uneven ground. The laptop never left the boy's lap. Sarah had mentioned it during their brief conversation, how Eli had been some kind of computer prodigy before the accident. Coding competitions, tech clubs, dreams of Silicon Valley. Now the damaged device served as both shield and security blanket, a reminder of everything he'd lost and everything he refused to let go. The wheelchair paused at the bottom of the porch. Steps. Walter had installed a ramp yesterday, his joints protesting as he worked through the afternoon heat. It wasn't pretty, weathered board salvaged from the old barn, but it was sturdy. He watched Eli examine it, noticed the slight tremor in those teenage hands as they gripped the wheels. First test of trust. The ramp creaked under the wheelchair's weight but held firm. Eli's relief was visible only in the slight loosening of his shoulders, but Walter counted it as a win. Small victories, the social worker had said. That's all they could hope for right now. Inside, the silence stretched between them like a living thing. Walter set a glass of lemonade on the table, careful to place it within easy reach. Eli's eyes flickered to it briefly before returning to the laptop's fractured screen. The teenager's fingers moved across the keyboard, typing nothing, a pianist practicing on broken keys. "Dinner'll be ready in an hour," Walter said, more to fill the quiet than anything else. "Your mother said you liked chicken pot pie. It was your grandmother's recipe, my sister's. Been in the family longer than this farm." At the mention of family, something shifted in Eli's expression. Pain, maybe, or anger. The typing stopped. Through the kitchen window, the setting sun painted the fields in shades of gold and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove called out, its soft coo echoing across the evening air. Walter remembered another sunset decades ago when his own world had shattered, the day they'd lost Eleanor, and the farm had become more mausoleum than home. "First night's the hardest," he found himself saying, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. Gets a little easier after that. Not much, but a little. Eli's hands tightened on the laptop. For a moment, Walter thought he saw tears gathering in the boy's eyes, but then the walls slammed back into place. The wheelchair turned sharply, heading toward the bedroom Sarah had helped prepare that morning. The door closed with a quiet click, more final than any slam could have been. Walter stood in the kitchen, listening to the settling sounds of the old farmhouse. The pot pie would be ready in 20 minutes. He'd leave a plate outside Eli's door, like leaving food for a wounded animal. Sometimes that's all you could do, provide sustenance and space, and hope that healing would find its way in through the cracks. The laptop's glow was visible under Eli's door, a pale blue reminder of a world beyond the farm's boundaries. Walter touched the foreclosure notice in his pocket, its edges worn soft from worried handling. Two broken things, he thought, a boy and a farm, both running out of time. But sometimes, just sometimes, broken things could save each other. 4:15. The mechanical alarm clock on Walter's bedside table hadn't failed him in 30 years. Its brass bells rang out in the pre-dawn darkness, a sound as much a part of the farm as the rustling corn or the distant lowing of cattle. The clock had been Eleanor's wedding gift to him. Swiss-made, she'd said, built to last generations, like the farm itself was supposed to be. Walter's fingers found the worn winding key by touch, its familiar shape a comfort in the dark. Outside his window, the stars still held court over the Pennsylvania countryside, their light unchanged since his grandfather's time. Some things, at least, remained constant. The floorboards creaked their usual morning song as he made his way. Downstairs, past Eli's closed door, where no light showed beneath, though Walter suspected the boy hadn't slept. The night had carried soft sounds of typing, mechanical lullabies in the dark hours. Coffee first. The percolator gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with warmth and promise. Walter moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency, each motion honed by decades of repetition. But today, he found himself adding an extra cup to the counter, just in case. Through the kitchen window he caught movement. A shadow against shadows, wheelchair-shaped, gliding past the barn. So the boy was up after all. Walter watched Eli's silhouette merge with the pre-dawn grey, wondering what drove a teenager from bed at this hour. Curiosity, insomnia, or perhaps the same restlessness that had always pulled Walter himself from sleep, that bone-deep need to witness the world's daily rebirth. The old alarm clock ticked steadily on the counter where he'd placed it, marking time until sunrise. Its face caught. The first hint of morning light, brass gleaming dully like a worn coin. Walter added sugar to the second coffee cup. He'd seen Sarah do the same for Eli yesterday, and carried both outside. He found the boy behind the barn, wheelchair parked facing east. The first fingers of dawn were just beginning to reach across the fields, turning the dew to diamonds on the cornstalks. Without a word, Walter set one cup within Eli's reach, then leaned against the barn wall to sip his own. They watched the sunrise together, sharing silence and steam from their cups. The farm came alive around them, chickens stirring in there. Iguop, barn cats emerging from their nightly haunts, a red-tailed hawk sailing overhead on morning thermals. "Gonna check the cattle first," Walter said finally, not expecting a response. "Then the chicken feed needs mixing. Your mother said you're good with numbers. Might be able to help me figure out these new organic feed ratios they're recommending." Eli's fingers tightened around his cup, but his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Still, he hadn't immediately wheeled away. Walter counted that as progress. The morning unfolded according to its own ancient schedule. Walter moved through his chores, narrating as he went. Less for Eli's benefit than to break the heavy quiet. The boy followed at a distance, watching. Learning, maybe. The wheelchair left tracks in the dew-wet grass, parallel lines like train rails, leading from task to task. By the time Walter reached the chicken coop, the sun had climbed fully above the horizon. The old alarm clock in the kitchen would be marking 7 a.m. now, its steady heartbeat echoing through an empty house. Out here, time moved differently. It was measured in scattered feed and gathered eggs, in the rhythm of necessary things. Eli wheeled closer to watch the chickens crowd around Walter's feet, his expression unreadable, but alert. One of the friendlier hens, a plump Rhode Island, red they called Lady, pecked curiously at his wheelchair's wheels. The boy's hand moved slightly, as if wanting to reach down to her, but stopped short. "She's gentle," Walter said, picking up Lady and moving slowly toward Eli. "Been here longer than most. Knows every inch of this place. Stubborn old bird, but she's got a good heart." He wasn't just talking about the chicken, and from the flicker in Eli's eyes, the boy knew it. For a long moment they stood frozen in tableau. Old farmer, wounded boy, patient hen. Then, slowly, Eli's hand descended. Lady submitted to his tentative touch with dignified grace, her soft clucking the only sound, besides the ticking of that distant clock. Morning light spilled across the barnyard, turning the scene golden. Walter felt something ease in his chest, some tension he hadn't known he was carrying. The day's work stretched ahead, same as it always had, but now, watching Eli's fingers gentle against Lady's feathers, he wondered if sameness wasn't just repetition, if maybe it could be renewal too. The alarm clock would ring again tomorrow, marking another dawn. But maybe, Walter thought, it wasn't just marking time passing. Maybe it was counting the moments until something new could begin. The barn door's hinges screamed like dying metal, a sound that set Walter's teeth on edge. 3 days of WD-40 hadn't helped. The door hung crooked, catching on the worn track above, making every opening a battle of will against rust and time. His tool belt shifted heavily against his hip as he pushed, muscles protesting. From his spot near the water trough, Eli watched. He'd taken to following Walter around the farm, maintaining a careful distance, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid interaction. But today, something in his posture had changed. His head was tilted slightly, eyes tracking Walter's movements. With what looked like calculation, the door jerked to a stop halfway open, defiant as ever. Walter stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Been meaning to fix this since before you were born," he admitted to the air. "Eleanor always said I'd get around to it someday. Suppose some day's taking its time arriving." A soft sound made him turn. Eli had wheeled closer, his expression focused on the door's upper mechanism. One hand rose, pointing to the track, then made a slight twisting motion. Walter squinted up at where the boy indicated. The track's warped. Another gesture, no, not warped, twisted. The mounting brackets had worked loose over time, torquing the entire rail system. No wonder the door fought him every morning. Without thinking, Walter reached for his tool belt, then paused. The tools hung too high for Eli to reach from his chair, but the boy's eyes held a knowledge that spoke of hours spent taking things apart, understanding their mechanics. Walter unbuckled the belt, its leather worn smooth by years of use. "Hold this a minute?" He offered it to Eli, who hesitated only briefly before accepting. The teenager's fingers moved over the tools with familiar reverence. Socket wrench, pliers, screwdrivers nestled in their ancient leather pockets. His hands settled on the adjustable wrench, testing its weight. Walter dragged over an old crate, climbing up to examine the track more closely. "Gonna need that wrench," he said, extending his hand down. The tool was pressed into his palm with surprising precision, positioned for immediate use. They worked in silence, communicating through gestures and intuition. Eli would point, Walter would adjust. The wrench passed back and forth between them like a conversation neither could voice. Aloud. When the mounting brackets refused to align, it was Eli who thought to use the level from the bottom of the tool belt, his hands steady as he directed Walter's adjustments through small movements of his head. The morning stretched on, measured, in quarter turns of the wrench and the gradual straightening of ancient metal. Walter found himself describing the door's history between adjustments, how his grandfather had installed it in '52, using oak boards thick enough to weather any storm, how Eleanor had painted it red every spring until the year she couldn't any more. Eli listened, or seemed to. His focus remained on the work, but his shoulders had lost some of their rigid tension. When the final bolt needed tightening, he held the level with careful precision, nodding once when the bubble settled perfectly center. Walter stepped down from the crate, his joints complaining. Together they watched as he gripped the doors, edge and pulled. It slid smoothly along the restored track, opening wide enough to reveal the barn's shadowy interior without a single protest of metal on metal. "Well, I'll be damned," Walter breathed. He turned to find Eli examining the tool belt still resting in his lap, fingers tracing the worn edges of each pocket. The leather was cracked in places, stained with decades of honest work. Like the door, it had served faithfully but needed attention. "You know," Walter said carefully, "could probably rig up something to hold it lower, make it easier to reach from the chair." He gestured to the workbench inside the barn. "Got some spare leather, couple extra buckles. Might take some engineering." But he let the words trail off, not wanting to push. But Eli's hands had stilled on the tool belt, and something shifted in his expression, like a door opening, just a crack, letting in a shaft of light. The wheelchair moved forward, crossing the threshold smoothly thanks to their morning's work. Eli's fingers found the wrench again, held it up questioningly. Walter nodded, following him into the barn's cool shadows. The tool belt would need to be completely rebuilt, adapted to a new purpose. Like the door, like the farm itself, like both of them, broken things finding new ways to be useful. As Walter gathered supplies from the workbench, he realized he was smiling. Sometimes the best fixes weren't repairs at all, but transformations. The farm ledger sat open on the kitchen table, its pages yellow with age. Columns of Walter's careful handwriting marched across the grid lines. Feed costs, equipment repairs, crop yields. 40 years of the farm's life recorded in fading ink. He squinted at the latest entry, trying to make sense of the numbers that refused to add up to anything but trouble. A soft whirring of wheels announced Eli's arrival. The boy had been different since the barn door repair, more present somehow. Now he paused in the doorway, attention caught by the scattered papers and receipts surrounding the ledger. "Bank wants updated projections," Walter explained, though he hadn't been asked. "Something about viable business models and modernization requirements." The words felt foreign in his mouth, like stones he couldn't quite spit out. "Been farming this land longer than their loan office has been alive, but apparently that's not good enough anymore." Eli wheeled closer, head tilted as he studied the ledger's cramped columns. His laptop, constant companion these past days, hummed softly in his lap. After a moment, he reached for one of the receipts, then glanced at Walter questioningly. "Help yourself." Walter pushed the papers closer. "Maybe you can make more sense of it than I can. Numbers used to be simpler back when corn was corn and you didn't need a degree to understand feed supplements." The teenager's fingers moved across his keyboard with practiced grace, despite the screen's spiderweb cracks. Walter watched as receipt after receipt was transformed into neat, digital rows. Eli's eyes narrowed in concentration, reminding Walter suddenly, painfully, of Eleanor poring over the books at this same table, finding order in chaos. "What's that program you're using?" he asked, leaning closer. Eli angled the screen in response. Some kind of spreadsheet, but more complex than anything Walter had seen before. Formulas flickered across the broken display, numbers rearranging themselves like magic. A graph appeared, showing the farm's income over the past 3 seasons. The downward trend was even clearer in digital form, a red line diving toward disaster. But then Eli's fingers flew across the keys again, and new lines appeared, projections, possibilities, paths they hadn't tried. "Hold on," Walter said, pointing to one of the green lines. "What's that scenario there?" Eli tabbed over to a different screen, revealing a calculation involving organic certification costs versus premium market prices. The numbers were daunting, but the projected return, Didn't think we could afford the transition, Walter mused. But you're factoring in something I'm not seeing. More typing. A new window opened, showing local farmers markets, organic food co-ops, farm-to-table restaurants within delivery distance. Potential customers they'd never considered, all within reach. Eli highlighted a column of numbers, grant programs, for sustainable agriculture conversion, including special funding for farms offering educational programs. The laptop's broken screen caught the afternoon light, its cracks creating a prism effect across the kitchen table. Like the tool belt they'd modified yesterday, the damage didn't stop it from being useful. Different, but not diminished. Your mother mentioned you were good with computers, Walter said quietly. Didn't realize you were good with business too, Eli's. Hands stilled on the keyboard. For a moment, Walter thought he'd said too much, pushed too hard. But then the boy reached for the old ledger, gently turning its pages until he found the first entry. Walter's grandfather's handwriting this time, dated 1952. His fingers traced the careful columns, then moved back to his laptop, creating a new spreadsheet tab. Understanding dawned. You want to digitize the whole thing, all 40 years? A slight nod. Eli's expression remained focused, but there was something else there now. Purpose, maybe, or pride. Would take weeks, Walter said. Months, even. Another nod. Firmer this time. On the screen, a new project folder appeared. Miller Farm Digital Archive. Historical data and future projections. Walter looked at the ledger, its paper worn soft at the corners from decades of worried page-turning, then at the laptop with its modern solutions wrapped in broken glass. Like the barn door yesterday, like the farm itself, sometimes fixing. Things meant finding a way to make old and new work together. Well, he said finally, pulling his chair closer. Guess we better get started then. These numbers won't crunch themselves. And for the first time since arriving at the farm, Eli's lips curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the spring fog when Walter began unloading lumber from his truck. Cedar planks, selected for their resistance to rot, released their sweet scent into the damp air. He'd spent an hour at the lumber yard yesterday, picking through the stacks for boards without knots or warping. This project needed to be perfect. He'd found the design online after midnight, sleep eluding him as he puzzled over how to make the farm more accessible. Wheelchair-height garden boxes, the article had called them. The pictures showed raised beds at just the right height for someone to tend without bending or stretching, or, in Eli's case, without having to leave his chair. The boy appeared. As Walter was laying out the tools, drawn by the sound of construction like a moth to flame. Since their work on the farm ledger, Eli had shown more interest in the day-to-day operations, though still without speaking. His modified tool belt hung from the side of his wheelchair, a symbol of their growing understanding. Thought we might try something different, Walter said, spreading the plans on a makeshift table. Those organic vegetables you found markets. For they'll need starting soon, but the regular beds are too low for easy reaching. Eli studied the drawings, head cocked in that way that meant he was solving problems in his mind. His fingers traced the measurements, paused at the irrigation system sketch. Then he reached for his laptop, pulled up a document Walter hadn't seen before. What's this? Walter leaned closer, squinting at the screen. Computer-drawn plans, more sophisticated than the printout he'd found. Eli had clearly been thinking about this too, designing improvements to the basic concept. The additions were clever, a built-in tool rack, adjustable shade panels for the summer heat, even a simple pulley system for moving heavier pots. Well, Walter said, trying to hide his smile, reckon your version's better than what I found. Should have known you'd be a step ahead. They began with the frame, Walter cutting the cedar while Eli measured and marked. The boy's perfectionism showed in every pencil line, each angle checked twice before Walter's saw touched wood. They developed a rhythm. Eli would point to where pieces needed joining, Walter would hold them in place, and together they'd secure the connections. The morning warmed around them as the box took shape. Other farmers might have questioned spending time on such a specialized project when the spring planting waited, but Walter saw how Eli's shoulders straightened with each board they added. This wasn't just about growing vegetables, it was about growing confidence. Your grandmother would have loved this, Walter found himself saying as they attached the irrigation lines. Eleanor was always experimenting with new growing methods, said farming had to evolve or die. He paused, remembering. She kept a wheelchair in the barn her last year, never used it. Too stubborn. But I saw her eyeing it sometimes, on bad days. Eli's hands stilled on the pipe he was connecting. His expression shifted, something understanding passing across his face. Then he reached for his tool belt, selected a wrench and offered it to Walter, handle first, like passing an olive branch. They finished the box as the sun reached its peak. 4 feet high, 6 feet long, with a recessed area underneath for Eli's wheelchair to slide into comfortably. The cedar glowed honey gold in the midday light, full of promise and possibility. Walter wiped his hands on his jeans, surveying their work. Just needs soil now. Got a special mix ordered, lighter than regular dirt, holds moisture better. He glanced at Eli. Could plant those heirloom tomato seeds you found online, the ones that'll fetch premium prices at the organic markets. Eli was already reaching for the bag of soil, determination written in every line of his body. Together, they filled the box, Walter scooping and Eli smoothing the surface with a rake they'd modified to work from his chair. When the soil was ready, Walter held out the seed packets. Your project, he said simply. You should do the honors. For a long moment, Eli stared at the seeds in his palm. Then, with deliberate care, he pressed the first one into the soil. His hands, usually so quick with technology, moved slowly now, respectfully. Each seed was a promise buried in dark earth, a future waiting to emerge. They planted all afternoon, the wheelchair-height garden box becoming something more than wood and dirt. Like the seeds they buried, something was taking root between them, fragile yet determined to grow. The old weather radio crackled to life at 2:17 a.m., its red alert light pulsing in the darkness of Walter's kitchen. Static-filled warnings of an approaching derecho, a rare straight-line windstorm capable of flattening entire farms. The automated voice spoke of 90-mile-per-hour gusts, torrential rain, possible tornadoes. Walter was already pulling on his boots when he heard it, the whir of Eli's wheelchair in the hallway. The boy appeared in the kitchen doorway, face, tail in the radio's blinking light. His laptop was clutched tight against his chest, weather radar maps visible on its cracked screen. Going to be bad, Walter said, grabbing flashlights from a drawer. Need to get the animals secured before it hits. Through the window, sheet lightning illuminated gathering clouds, still miles distant but moving fast. The weather radio continued, its monotone litany of warnings, each update more urgent than the last. Eli's wheelchair moved decisively toward the door. Walter started to protest. It wasn't safe. But the determination in the boy's eyes stopped him. They'd worked side by side for weeks now. He knew that look. Instead, he handed Eli one of the flashlights and grabbed the emergency kit Eleanor had insisted on maintaining, its contents updated every spring like clockwork. They reached the barn just as the wind began to rise. The horses were already restless, sensing the approaching storm. Walter worked quickly to secure extra hay in the stalls, while Eli wheeled from pen to pen, checking latches and water supplies. The radio's warnings followed them, transmitted now through Eli's laptop speakers. 30 minutes until impact. Need to close up the chicken coop, Walter shouted over the rising wind. Then the greenhouse. That new plastic sheeting won't stand a chance if we don't. A massive gust slammed into the barn, cutting him off. The building groaned, old timber protesting. Eli's wheelchair rocked slightly, and Walter saw fear flash. Across the boy's face, the same expression he'd worn in those first days after arriving, when everything felt unstable and threatening. But Eli didn't retreat. Instead, he pointed urgently at his laptop screen, where the radar showed the storm's course shifting, intensifying. His free hand gestured toward the chicken coop, then held up 10 fingers. 10 minutes, maybe less. They moved faster now, working in desperate synchronization. The chickens were harder to wrangle than usual, panic making them flighty. Through the open barn door, they could see the greenhouse's plastic covering beginning to pull loose, snapping like a sail in the strengthening gusts. "Almost done here," Walter called. "You head back to the house. I'll secure the greenhouse," and lightning struck somewhere very close, thunder following instantly. In the brilliant flash, Walter saw what Eli had already noticed, a massive branch from the old oak tree hanging precariously above the barn's entrance. The next strong gust could bring it down, trapping them inside. Eli's wheelchair was already moving, racing toward the door. But the ground had turned treacherous, mud slicking the worn paths. The chair's wheels spun, caught, slipped sideways toward a deep rut. Walter lunged forward, but he was too far away. He saw it happening as if in slow motion. The wheelchair tilting, Eli trying to compensate, the laptop tumbling. The branch above them creaked ominously, and then, cutting through wind and thunder and the weather radio's droning warnings, a voice. "Walter!" The sound of his name, spoken in desperate clarity, froze Walter for a split second. Then instinct took over. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, grabbed the wheelchair's handles, and pulled. They cleared the doorway just as the branch crashed down, spraying them with wet leaves and smaller twigs. For a moment, they sat there in the rain, Walter on his knees in the mud, Eli gripping his wheelchair's arms, both breathing hard. The laptop lay face down a few feet away, its screen finally completely shattered. Walter started, then had to catch his breath. "You spoke." Eli's hands trembled on the wheelchair's arms. His voice, when it came again, was rusty from disuse, but clear enough to hear over the storm. Couldn't let you get hurt." The weather radio's warnings still blared from the broken laptop, telling of destruction approaching. The wind howled around the barn's corners, and rain fell in sideways sheets. But in that moment, something far more powerful than the storm passed between them. Understanding, trust, connection. "Come on," Walter said finally, standing up. "Let's get to the house. Storm Cellar's got room for your chair." Together they moved through the darkness, flashlight beams dancing, while behind them the weather radio's red light blinked its steady warnings into the night. Some forces of nature couldn't be controlled, but others, like the bonds forged in crisis, could weather any storm. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating Eli's new laptop, a surprise from his mother after hearing him speak during their weekly call. The screen was intact this time, displaying the website he'd spent the past week. Building Miller Family Farm, growing tomorrow's legacy today. "Looks fancy," Walter said, leaning over Eli's shoulder to study the homepage. Their newly planted organic vegetables featured prominently in professional-looking photographs Eli had taken with his phone. The wheelchair-height garden box starred in several shots, its cedar sides weathering to a beautiful silver-grey, tomato plants already reaching for the sky. "It's not—" Eli paused, still getting used to speaking again. His voice came easier, now though he chose his words carefully. "Not just for show. People can order online. For pickup at the market." Walter scratched his chin, considering. The farmers' market was tomorrow, their first time selling in town. The organic certification had come through faster than expected, thanks to Eli's meticulous documentation and grant writing skills. "Folks around here aren't much for computers," Walter said, but without his usual skepticism. The storm had changed things between them, washed away old doubts like debris from the barn roof. "Already have orders." Eli clicked through to another screen. 23 pre-sales, mostly from the farm-to-table restaurants you mentioned, but some local families too. He gestured to a map showing customer locations. They saw the posts. Posts! Eli navigated to the farm's social media pages. Walter blinked at the images. Their daily work transformed into something almost poetic. Morning light on dew-covered vegetables, close-ups of weathered hands checking soil composition, the restored barn door sliding smoothly on its track. Even the chickens had their own following. People like seeing where their food comes from, Eli explained, who grows it, why it matters. His fingers moved across the keyboard, bringing up their most popular post, a series of photos showing the wheelchair-height garden box's construction, paired with a simple story about adaptation and growth. Walter felt his throat tighten. The post had hundreds of shares, dozens of comments, people expressing support, sharing their own stories of farming through challenges, asking about educational visits. One message was from a veterans rehabilitation center, inquiring about possible workshops. "Never figured people'd be interested in our little changes," Walter said softly. "They're not little." Eli's voice was stronger now. "They're innovative, sustainable. Both the farming and the accessibility." He pulled up their sales projections, updated with the pre-orders. "We're not just selling vegetables, we're selling hope." The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time until tomorrow's market. Outside, the morning crew from the local organic co-op was already arriving to help harvest, another connection Eli had forged through his digital networking. Walter watched through the window as they carefully gathered produce, following the quality control protocols Eli had documented in his new farm management system. "Your grandmother," Walter said suddenly, "she kept scrapbooks. Newspaper clippings about the farm, photos of good harvests, notes about what worked and what didn't. Called it her legacy project." He smiled at the memory. "This website of yours, it's like her scrapbooks, just alive, growing." Eli nodded, understanding. His hands moved to a different section of the site, one Walter hadn't seen before. Our story. There were photos here too, scanned from old albums. Walter's grandparents. Breaking ground in '52. Eleanor's first organic experiments in the '80s. The farm through decades of change and challenge. Added a new page last night, Eli said quietly, clicking one more link. About accessibility in farming. Got 3 messages already. Other farmers. Asking for garden box plans. Walter stared at the screen, seeing their small innovations through new eyes. The modified tool belt hung on the wall behind them, a testament to their first collaboration. Through the window, the morning sun caught the silver rails they'd installed along the barn's interior, making it navigable by wheelchair. Simple changes. "That meant everything. Reckon we better get ready then," Walter said finally. "Seems we've got customers waiting." Eli's smile, still rare but growing more frequent, flashed briefly. He reached for his modified tool belt, now equipped with produce scales and QR code scanner, alongside the traditional tools. Already packed the truck, arranged everything for easy reach from the chair. Together they headed outside, where the harvest crew worked steadily, filling crates with premium organic produce. Walter's phone buzzed in his pocket, another pre-order notification from the website. The future arriving in small, digital increments. Tomorrow, they would meet their customers face to face. But today, watching Eli confidently direct the morning's work, Walter realized they'd already built something more valuable than a website. They'd built a bridge between past and future, between limitations and possibilities, between a boy who couldn't speak and a farm that needed a new voice. Sarah's car pulled into the driveway just as Walter and Eli were setting up the new physical therapy equipment in the converted tool shed. Through the open door, Walter watched his niece step out, her face a mixture of anxiety and hope. Last time she'd stood in this spot, she'd been pushing a silent, angry boy in a wheelchair. Now, 2 months later, she was about to see how much had changed. "Mom!" Eli's voice carried across the yard. Still rough around the edges, but growing stronger. Each day, "Come see what we built." Walter hung back, giving them space for their reunion. Sarah moved forward slowly, taking in the transformed farmyard. The wheelchair-accessible paths, the thriving organic gardens, the restored barn with its smooth rolling door. Her eyes widened at the solar panels Eli had convinced Walter to install. Last week, their surfaces gleaming in the morning light, but it was the tool shed that drew her attention. The physical therapy equipment, parallel bars, resistance bands, exercise mats, and a specialized wheelchair workout station filled the space that once housed rusty machinery. Every piece had been carefully selected from medical supply catalogs, researched thoroughly on Eli's laptop during late-night planning sessions. "I've been doing the exercises," Eli said, demonstrating how they'd modified the parallel bars to accommodate his current strength level. "Walter helped spot me. We found videos online, talked to that rehabilitation specialist who visited last week." His words came easier now, each sentence a small victory. "It's not the same as the hospital gym, but it's better," Sarah interrupted softly, running her hand along the smooth wooden bars. Walter recognized her expression, the same look Eleanor had worn when watching their first organic crop sprout, hope taking root against all odds. "Show her how you've been practicing," Walter encouraged, moving to his familiar spot beside the bars. They had developed a routine over the past weeks, since Eli first mentioned wanting to work on his upper body strength. Eli positioned his wheelchair carefully, then gripped the bars. His arms trembled slightly with effort, but his face showed fierce determination as he lifted himself, holding the position while Sarah watched, tears gathering in her eyes. "The farm work helps," Eli explained between controlled breaths. "Building the garden boxes, managing the market stand. It's all therapy, really." He lowered himself back into the chair, tired but proud. "Walter says farming's just physical. A therapy with a purpose. Your uncle says that, does he?" Sarah's voice wavered as she turned to Walter. The morning light caught the silver in her hair, so like Eleanor's, Walter thought with a pang. His sister would have loved seeing her grandson here, healing among the growing things. "Farm's been good therapy for me too," Walter admitted. "Was letting it slip away before Eli came. Now," he gestured toward the window, where the new greenhouse stretched its metal spine against the sky, filled with organic seedlings destined for next month's market. Sarah moved deeper into the shed, examining the careful modifications they'd made. Every tool had its place, positioned for easy reach from a wheelchair. The floor was smooth concrete, freshly poured, to eliminate any barriers to movement. Even the lighting had been redesigned, eliminating shadows that might hide obstacles. "His doctors won't believe this," she said, touching a set of resistance bands color-coded for different exercises. "They said the rural placement might be too challenging, too isolated. But you've built something remarkable here, Eli." "Did most of it," Walter said. "Design, research, planning. I just provided the space and an extra pair of hands." "We did it together," Eli corrected, his voice firm. "Like the website says, growing tomorrow's legacy today." He wheeled over to a corkboard they'd mounted on the wall, covered with printouts of exercises, progress charts, and, Walter noticed with surprise, photos of them working in the fields, building the garden boxes, selling at the market. Sarah studied the board, her finger tracing a graph showing Eli's increasing strength measurements. Next to it hung a calendar marked with therapy goals and farm tasks, the two sets of activities intertwined like growing vines. "I wasn't sure," she admitted quietly, "sending him here. Thought maybe we both needed more time to adjust to everything." "Time moves different on a farm," Walter said, watching Eli demonstrate another exercise modification they'd developed. "Slower, maybe, but also fuller. Everything that grows needs its own season." Through the shed's window, the morning sun painted long shadows across the farmyard. Sarah wiped her eyes, smiling as Eli eagerly explained their next project, adapting the farmer's market booth to serve as a demonstration space for accessible farming techniques. Some crops, Walter thought, watching them, yielded harvests. "You," could never measure in bushels or pounds. Some growth couldn't be tracked on any chart, but you could see it clear as day if you knew where to look. The farm management app glowed on Eli's laptop screen, lines of code scrolling past as he made final adjustments. Walter watched from his usual spot at the kitchen table, still amazed at how his great-nephew's fingers could weave digital magic from nothing but keystrokes and determination. Outside, a gentle rain fed their newest organic plots, the sound a counterpoint to Eli's typing. "So, explain it to me again," Walter said, sipping his morning coffee. "How's this program different from the spreadsheets we've been using?" Eli paused. His coding, turning the screen so Walter could see better. "It's integrated," he said, voice growing stronger with enthusiasm. "Watch." He clicked through several screens, each showing different aspects of the farm's operations. Soil sensors feed data directly into the system. Weather forecasts, moisture levels, pH readings, all automatic. Walter leaned closer, recognizing the familiar patterns of his farm translated into digital form. The new soil sensors they'd installed last week appeared as colored dots on a field map, each one reporting vital information about their organic crops. Decades of farming instinct rendered in pixels and data points. "Here," Eli continued, opening another window. "Remember how you taught me about crop rotation? How your grandfather used to plan it?" His fingers flew across the keyboard, and suddenly, Walter's old field journals appeared alongside modern agricultural research papers. The app combines traditional wisdom with current science, suggests optimal rotations based on both. Walter nodded slowly, seeing how his grandfather's hand-drawn field maps had been transformed into interactive displays. "And that warning system you mentioned? Right here." Eli pulled up a notification panel. "If the sensors detect problems, moisture too low, pH off, pest patterns, it alerts us immediately. No more walking the whole property every morning just to check conditions." "Some might say that walking's part of farming," Walter mused, but without criticism. He'd seen how the app helped Eli participate in farm management, despite his mobility. Challenges, technology building bridges where biology had created barriers. "Still need experience," Eli said quickly, glancing at Walter. "The app, it's just a tool, like the modified tool belt. Useless without knowing how to farm." His voice carried a hint of uncertainty, seeking approval. Walter smiled, remembering similar conversations with Eleanor years ago, when she'd first proposed organic methods. "Tools change," he said. "Good farming, still good farming." He pointed to a blinking alert on the screen. "Speaking of which, looks like Field 3's getting too much rain. Drainage ditches might need checking." Eli was already pulling up the field's data history, overlaying it with topographical maps. "The slope changed after the storm," he observed, fingers tracing the contour lines. "Water's pooling here instead of flowing to the main ditch." He looked up at Walter. "The app can suggest optimal drainage patterns, but nothing beats seeing it firsthand." Walter finished, standing up. "Reckon we better take a look before this rain gets worse." They headed out together, Eli navigating his wheelchair along the gravelled paths they'd laid down throughout the property. The rain had softened to a misty drizzle, the kind that Eleanor used to call growing weather. Perfect conditions for their organic crops, as long as the drainage held. At Field 3, Walter knelt to examine the soil while Eli consulted the app's readings. They worked in comfortable synchronization, each contributing their expertise to solve the problem. Walter's decades of experience combined with Eli's technological insight, neither complete without the other. "Could run a new ditch here," Walter suggested, tracing a line through the wet earth. "Connect it to the main system by the old oak tree." Eli nodded, already modeling the proposal on his weather-protected laptop. "The elevation data agrees," he said. "And look!" He turned the screen, showing a simulation of water flow patterns. "If we add a secondary channel here, it'll help during heavy storms too." They spent the morning planning the drainage solution, Walter's practical knowledge informing Eli's digital models. The app grew smarter with each piece of information they added, learning from both the sensors and Walter's experience. Like the farm itself, it was a living thing, evolving with each season. "You know," Walter said as they headed back to the house, their plans complete. "Your grandmother would have loved this. She always said farming had to keep growing, just like crops do, had to adapt." Eli smiled, rain beading on his laptop's protective case. "Think she'd understand the code?" "Maybe not the code itself," Walter chuckled, "but the purpose of it." "Absolutely." He looked across their fields, where technology and tradition were learning to work together. She understood better than anyone. Everything. On the farms connected, soil to sky, past to future, people to purpose, like code and dirt, Eli added softly, his fingers resting on the keyboard. In the distance, their organic crops stretched toward the clearing sky, growing stronger with each passing day, just like them. The Agricultural Innovation Award application sat open on Eli's laptop, its deadline counter ticking away in the corner of the screen. Regional Farm Technology and Sustainability Competition, the header announced in bold letters. First prize, $50,000, and a feature in Modern Farming Quarterly. But it was the smaller text that had caught their attention. Special consideration for innovations in accessible agriculture. "Read it again," Walter said, pacing the kitchen while evening light filtered through the windows. They'd been working on the application for days, each revision bringing them closer to something that felt both terrifying and possible. Eli cleared his throat, his voice steady now after weeks of regular speech therapy exercises. The Miller Farm Integration System combines traditional agricultural wisdom with cutting-edge technology, creating a model for accessible, sustainable farming practices. He paused, glancing at Walter. "Should we mention the wheelchair garden boxes first instead?" Walter stopped pacing, considering. The application was more than just a shot at prize money. It was a chance to share what they'd built here, to show others that limitation didn't mean the end of dreams, just the beginning of adaptation. "What about starting with your soil monitoring system?" he suggested. "How it helps farmers with mobility issues manage larger properties." He moved to look over Eli's shoulder at the screen, where photos of their innovations filled a digital portfolio. The modified tool belt, the sensor network, the accessible market stand that had become a local sensation. "Could add the education program too," Eli said, opening another document. 3 schools already signed up for fall tours. His fingers moved across the keyboard, adding details about their plans to teach both sustainable farming and adaptive technology, the wheelchair-accessible paths they'd built through the teaching garden, the adjustable height workstations in the new greenhouse. Walter smiled, remembering the special education teacher who'd visited last week, tears in her eyes as she watched her students plant seeds in the raised beds. "Never thought we'd become teachers," he said softly. "Never thought I'd become a farmer," Eli countered, but his tone was warm. He tabbed to another section of the application, where they detailed the farm's financial turnaround, the organic certification, the growing customer base, the waiting list for their accessible farming workshops. The kitchen clock ticked steadily. As they worked, refining each section, outside, the evening chorus of crickets began, nature's reminder that some things remained constant even as others changed. Walter made fresh coffee, placing Eli's cup within easy reach, small habits of care they'd developed over the months. "There's one more thing," Eli said finally, pulling up a new document. "Had an idea for the presentation part." The competition required finalists to demonstrate their innovations before a panel of judges. "What if we show them this?" The screen filled with a video clip from their security camera, showing Walter and Eli working together in the fields. The footage had been edited to highlight their seamless cooperation, Walter's traditional farming techniques blending with Eli's technological solutions. The modified tools, the sensor readings, the accessible equipment all working in harmony. Sarah helped film some extra scenes last weekend, Eli admitted. When you were showing me how to judge soil composition by feel, we got it all. More clips played. Walter demonstrating organic pest control methods, while Eli logged data into his app, both of them teaching a group of veterans how to use the adapted garden tools. Walter watched in silence, seeing their daily work through new eyes. Every challenge they'd faced had led to an innovation. Every limitation had sparked a solution. The farm hadn't just survived, it had transformed, becoming something neither of them could have created alone. Your grandmother, Walter said suddenly, she kept a journal about her organic farming experiments, called them her crazy dreams at first. He moved to the old hutch, pulling out a worn notebook. Might be something in here worth adding to the application. Show them we've always been innovators on this land. Eli took the journal carefully, its pages soft with age. Think we have a chance. His voice carried equal parts hope and uncertainty. Competition's national. Lots of big farms with more resources. They've got resources, Walter agreed, settling back into his chair. But they don't have what we built here. This isn't just about farming differently. It's about proving that can't is just the beginning of how can we. Together, they turned back to the application. Eleanor's journal open beside Eli's laptop, like a bridge between past and future. Outside, their solar-powered field sensors blinked steadily in the gathering dusk, monitoring the crops that grew in soil that had nourished 3 generations of Miller farmers. Soon there would be a 4th, though not in any way they'd expected. The application deadline counter continued its steady countdown, marking time until they would share their story with the world. Some harvests, Walter thought, watching Eli confidently. Typed their final revisions, yielded more than just crops. Some grew hope itself. The wheelchair's wheel locked up halfway between the barn and the house, the mechanism seizing with a sound like breaking glass. Eli felt it immediately. The sudden resistance, the pull to the left, the loss of control he'd feared since those first days in rehabilitation. The morning sun beat down as he tried to force the wheel forward, but something deep in the chair's workings had finally given way. Walter looked up from the tomato plants he was staking, hearing the strange metal noise. Eli, something wrong with the chair. I'm fine, Eli snapped, the words coming out sharper than he'd intended. But his hands were shaking on the wheels, memory and fear colliding like storm fronts. The chair had been his constant since the accident, the one thing he could control when everything else had spun away. Let me take a look, Walter said, already moving toward him. Might be something simple. I said I'm fine. The shout echoed across the farmyard, startling a flock of sparrows from the garden. Eli's chest felt tight, each breath shorter than the last. The broken wheel seemed to mock him. Another reminder of all the broken pieces in his life. Walter stopped, recognized the tension thrumming through his great-nephew's body. It was the same rigid posture from those first silent weeks, when grief and anger had built walls higher than the barn. But now there was something else in Eli's face. Fear, yes, but also shame. Chair's been through a lot, Walter said carefully, keeping his distance. All that farm work, the uneven ground, bound to need maintenance eventually. Maintenance? Eli's laugh held no humor. It's not one of your tractors, Walter. It's... His voice cracked. It's all I have left. The one thing that still worked right. The morning breeze carried the scent of ripening tomatoes and fresh-turned earth, the familiar smells of their shared work. But right now, Eli couldn't focus on any of that. The broken wheel had opened something inside him, releasing words held back too long. I used to run track, he said. So quietly, Walter had to lean. Closer to hear. Could do a mile in under 5 minutes. Wrote code for 18 hours straight when I was working on my first big project. Climbed trees, built robots. Never needed anyone's help to... His hands clenched on the useless wheels. Never needed help to just exist. Walter moved slowly, settling onto the ground near Eli's chair, not touching, not trying to fix anything, just present. Tell me about the robots, he said softly. The unexpected request caught Eli off guard. What? The robots you built before? Walter's voice remained steady, grounding. Were they like the sensors we use in the fields? Eli's breathing slowly steadied as memory shifted his focus. No, they were smaller. One could solve a Rubik's Cube. Another followed light patterns. His hands relaxed slightly on the wheels. Won the state science fair with them. Sounds like you've always been good at solving problems, Walter observed. Finding ways to make things work better. Yeah. Well, Eli gestured bitterly at the broken wheel. Can't solve this. Can't? Walter's tone sharpened slightly. Funny word, can't. Remember what your grandmother used to say about it. Despite himself, Eli felt a small smile tug at his lips. They'd found Eleanor's journals last week while preparing for the competition. She said can't is just the first draft of how. Smart woman, your grandmother. Walter stood up slowly, knees creaking. Now, seems to me we've got ourselves an engineering problem here. Got any of those robot building skills left? Eli looked at the seized wheel, really looked at it for the first time since it broke. The mechanism wasn't so different from the automated irrigation system they'd designed, or the adjustable platforms in the greenhouse. Just another puzzle needing solution. Would need tools, he said slowly. Different ones than we use for farm. Equipment. And, he paused, the admission difficult but necessary. And help. Can't lift the chair to work on it while I'm in it. Good thing we've got a whole barn full of tools, Walter said. And I've got 2 good arms for lifting. He paused, then added gently, no shame in needing help, Eli. Even the strongest crops need support to grow right. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming the earth around them. From the garden came the steady drip of the irrigation system. They'd built together, each drop feeding the roots below. Eli touched the broken wheel again, this time with a mechanic's curiosity rather than a victim's fear. Think we could, He hesitated, then continued stronger. Think we could modify it, make it better for farm work. Walter smiled, hearing the shift in his great-nephew's voice from despair to determination. Reckon that's what we do best around here. Turn broken things into better ones. Together, they began planning the repair, the broken wheelchair becoming not an end, but a beginning. Another chance to prove that limitation was just another word for innovation waiting to happen. The family photo album lay open on the kitchen table, its pages brown with age. Walter had found it while clearing space in the attic for their new accessible farming education center, tucked away in a cedar chest alongside Eleanor's journals. Now, as evening rain drummed against the windows, he and Eli pored over the photographs, each image a window into the farm's past. That's her, isn't it? Eli's finger hovered over a faded color photograph from the 1980s. Grandma Eleanor? Walter nodded, throat tight. The picture showed Eleanor in her element, kneeling beside her first organic garden plot, soil staining her jeans, but joy radiating from her face. Took that the day she decided to transition the whole farm to organic. Everyone said she was crazy, that it wouldn't work. He smiled at the memory. She just said they lacked imagination. Eli wheeled closer, studying the photograph with new interest. Since repairing and modifying his wheelchair last week, his movements had gained confidence, each adjustment they'd made transforming limitation into capability. She looks determined, stubborn as a mule, your grandmother. Walter carefully turned the page, but she could see possibilities others missed, like here. He pointed to another photo, this one showing a complicated irrigation system Eleanor had designed. She combined old farming wisdom with new ideas. Sound familiar? Eli's hands, still bearing traces of soil from their morning's work, traced the pattern of pipes in the photograph. Our sensor system, he said softly. It's not so different, is it? Just updated. They continued through the album, decades of the farm's history unfolding before them. Walter's grandfather breaking ground in '52, the original barn raising. The first Miller Farm market stand, Each photograph carried stories, echoes of decisions and dreams that had shaped the land they now tended. "Wait," Eli said suddenly, leaning forward. "What's that one?" The picture was small, tucked into a corner almost as an afterthought. It showed a young Walter standing beside a strange-looking contraption, a modified tractor seat with extra controls and support structures. "Ah," Walter said, memories flooding back. "That was for old Joe McKinnon, local farmer who lost use of his legs in Nam. Eleanor saw him struggling to keep his farm going and—" He shook his head, smiling. "Next thing I knew, she had me out, in the workshop, designing ways to adapt equipment for him." Eli's eyes widened. She was doing accessible farming. Back then, in her way. Walter turned another page, revealing more projects Eleanor had tackled over the years. She believed farming was for everyone who loved the land, regardless of their challenges. Said limitations were just problems waiting for solutions. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of this revelation settle. The rain continued its gentle rhythm on the roof, accompanying the quiet turning of pages. Then Eli spoke, his voice thoughtful. "All these years, I thought," he paused, gathering words, "thought I was the first one to bring innovation to the farm. That I was somehow changing things, but really I'm just continuing what she started." "You're doing more than continuing it," Walter said. "You're evolving it. Those garden boxes of ours, the adaptive tools, the education program. Eleanor would have loved seeing how far you've taken her ideas. More photos, Eleanor's last harvest before her illness, the farm's first organic certification ceremony, Sarah as a little girl helping in the greenhouse." The album's pages tracked not just changes in the land, but the growth of a legacy passed down through generations. "There's space, you know," Walter said carefully, turning to the album's final pages, "for new photographs, new chapters." Eli nodded, understanding. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to pictures they'd taken for the competition application, the accessible modifications, the technology integration, the teaching gardens. "Think she'd mind us adding digital photos to her album?" Walter laughed, softly. "Eleanor? She'd probably ask why we hadn't done it sooner." He watched as Eli selected images, each one showing how they'd built upon her foundation. "She always said a farm had to grow in more ways than one." Together they began adding the new photographs, past and present merging on the album's pages. The rain eased outside, and through breaks in the clouds, evening sunlight painted the kitchen in warm gold. The same light that had shone on Eleanor's first organic gardens, now illuminating their own innovations. "You know what this means," Eli said suddenly, looking up from the album. "About the competition?" Walter raised an eyebrow questioningly. "We're not just showing them our ideas." Eli's voice grew stronger, filled with purpose. "We're showing them her legacy, proving that accessibility, sustainability, innovation, it's all part of the same story. The story she started." Walter closed the album gently, its covers now holding both past and future. "Reckon you're right," he said, "and Eleanor always did love a good story." The converted barn hummed with nervous energy as Eli clicked through their presentation slides one final time. The projection screen they'd rigged up caught the late afternoon sun, casting their practice audience in a gentle glow. Local farmers, market customers, and students from their accessibility workshops had all gathered to help them prepare for next week's competition. "Start again from the sensor demonstration," Walter suggested, adjusting his collar. The new shirt Sarah had insisted he buy for the presentation still felt stiff, formal in a way farming never was. But as Eli had pointed out, they weren't just representing themselves anymore. They were showing the world what was possible when tradition met innovation. Eli nodded, wheeling to the center of their makeshift stage. His voice, once silenced by trauma, now carried clearly through the barn. "The Miller Farm Integration System begins with these." He held up one of their soil sensors, its solar panel catching the light. "But the real innovation isn't in the technology itself. It's in how we've adapted it for accessible farming." The presentation flowed smoother now after days of practice. Each slide told part of their story. The wheelchair height garden boxes, the modified tools, the digital management system. But it was the photos of their workshop participants that brought the story to life. Veterans learning to farm again, children with disabilities planting their first seeds, elderly farmers discovering new ways to stay connected to their land. The key is customization, Eli continued, demonstrating how their tool belt system could be adjusted for different needs. Every farmer faces unique challenges. Our solutions are designed to be adapted, modified, improved upon. From the audience, old Joe McKinnon, the veteran Walter had helped decades ago, raised his hand. "Tell them about the economic impact," he called out. "How accessing these methods has helped small farms stay viable." Walter stepped forward, picking up the thread. "Our organic certification rates have increased 30% since implementing these systems." The numbers flashed on screen, backed by graphs from Eli's meticulous documentation. But more importantly, we're seeing farmers return to land they thought they had to abandon due to physical limitations. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Many of them had their own stories of adaptation, their own reasons for believing in what the Miller farm was trying to achieve. Some had contributed ideas to the project, others had tested prototypes, all had become part of something larger than themselves. "Now for the technical demonstration," Eli announced, pulling up their farm management app. This was the part that had worried Walter initially, showing investors and agricultural experts the complex system his great-nephew had developed. But watching Eli navigate through the interface, explaining how traditional farming wisdom had been integrated with modern technology, Walter felt only pride. "Question," called Sarah from her seat near the front. "What about farms that can't afford all this technology? How does your system help them?" Eli smiled, wheeling over to the tool display they'd set up. "That's where the modular approach comes in. Everything we've developed can be implemented in stages, starting with simple modifications." He lifted their prototype of a universal tool, handle, designed to accommodate various grip strengths and ranges of motion. Sometimes, the biggest changes start with the smallest adjustments. The presentation continued, each element polished by practice, but still carrying the authentic enthusiasm of discovery. Walter watched Eli field questions with growing confidence, saw how naturally he'd grown into his role as an innovator and teacher. The silent, angry boy who'd arrived at the farm seemed like a distant memory. As the session wound down, their practice audience offered final suggestions and encouragement. Old Joe wheeled forward to examine their latest adaptive equipment designs. Local organic farmers discussed marketing strategies. Parents of children from their workshops shared stories of renewed hope and purpose. "One more thing," Walter said. As the crowd began to disperse, "We'd like to thank you all for something bigger than just helping us practice." He glanced at Eli, who nodded encouragement. "This farm, it's been in our family for generations, but family isn't just about blood. It's about community, about people coming together to help each other grow." Eli moved to Walter's side, his modified tool belt catching the evening light. "When we present next week, we won't just be showing them our innovations. We'll be showing them what's possible when a community believes in second chances, in new beginnings." The setting sun painted the barn in shades of gold, highlighting the accessible paths they'd built, the adapted equipment they'd designed, the fusion of old wisdom and new ideas. Their audience applauded, not just for the presentation, but for everything it represented. Hope made tangible, limitations transformed into possibilities. Later, as they adjusted their notes and fine-tuned their demonstrations one last time, Walter caught Eli studying Eleanor's photograph on their final slide. "Think we're ready?" the boy asked softly. Walter smiled, seeing in his great-nephew's eyes the same determination that had driven Eleanor to transform the farm decades ago. "Ready as any crop come harvest time. Now we just have to trust in what we've grown." The judges' scoring sheets lay fanned out across the conference table, crisp and official under the hotel's fluorescent lights. 5 agricultural experts, 2 technology investors, and a sustainability consultant, all waiting to evaluate what a small Pennsylvania farm could teach them about the future of agriculture. Walter stood behind Eli's wheelchair in the presentation holding area, both of them watching through glass doors as the current finalists wrapped up their demonstration. The competing team's display was impressive. Sleek drones, automated harvesting robots, artificial intelligence systems for crop management. "They've got military funding," Eli murmured, fingers drumming nervously on his armrest. "Their equipment probably costs more than our entire farm." "Probably does," Walter agreed, adjusting his tie for the 100th time. "But they don't have what we've got." "What's that?" "Dirt under our fingernails." Walter smiled, touching the small pouch of soil samples they'd brought. "Real experience, real solutions for real people." Before Eli could respond, the conference room doors opened. A coordinator with a clipboard gestured them forward. "Miller Farm presentation team, you're up." They moved together into the brightly lit room, their modified tools and sensor prototypes arranged carefully on the demonstration table. The judges looked up from their notes, expressions neutral, pens poised. Walter felt his throat tighten. But then he caught sight of the small photograph they'd tucked into their display. Eleanor in her organic gardens, showing the world what was possible. Eli wheeled to center stage with practiced confidence, his chair's newly modified wheels moving smoothly across the carpeted floor. "Good morning," he began, voice clear and strong. "We're here to show you something different, not just technology for technology's sake, but innovation with purpose." The presentation flowed just as they'd practiced. Walter demonstrated their adaptive tools, while Eli explained the integration of traditional farming wisdom with modern accessibility features. The judges leaned forward when they showed their soil sensor network, nodding as Eli pulled up real-time data from the farm on his laptop. "But the real breakthrough," Eli continued, "isn't in any single piece of equipment." He gestured to their before and after photos, showing transformed lives alongside transformed farming methods. "It's in proving that limitation isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of innovation." One judge, a weathered woman with practical creases around her eyes, raised her hand. "Your cost analysis shows remarkably low implementation expenses. How do you achieve this?" "Modular design," Walter stepped in, lifting their universal tool handle. "Everything we create can be adapted to different needs, different budgets. A farmer might start with simple modifications." He demonstrated the adjustable grips, then add technology as they're able. "It's about evolution, not revolution." The sustainability consultant frowned at his notes. "But your crop yields. Surely these adaptations impact efficiency." Eli's fingers flew across his laptop, bringing up their production data. "Actually, our yields have increased 28% since implementing these systems. When farmers can work comfortably, they work better. We're not just making farming accessible, we're making it more efficient." The questions continued, each one met with practical demonstrations and real-world evidence. Walter showed how their modified tool belt could be adjusted for various disabilities, while Eli explained their educational outreach program. The judges' pens moved constantly, filling their scoring sheets with notes. Then came the technical demonstration. Eli pulled up their farm management app, showing how it integrated accessibility features with traditional agricultural knowledge. Walter held his breath. This was the moment where everything could go wrong. But the system performed flawlessly, each screen highlighting their unique approach to sustainable, accessible farming. "One final question," the lead judge said as their allotted time drew to a close. "Your application mentions this project was inspired by earlier work on your farm. Could you elaborate?" Walter and Eli exchanged glances. This was the moment they'd prepared for, the heart of their story. Walter stepped forward, pulling Eleanor's journal from his pocket. "My wife, Eleanor," he began, voice soft but carrying, "started experimenting with adaptive farming methods back in the 80s. She believed that anyone who loved the land deserved a chance to farm it. He opened the journal to their bookmarked page. What you've seen today isn't just innovation, it's legacy, a promise kept. Eli wheeled forward, adding, "Everything we've created builds on her foundation, but we've added something she couldn't have imagined." He pulled up their website, showing the growing network of farmers adopting their methods. "We're not just adapting tools. We're building community, sharing solutions, proving that the future of farming belongs to everyone willing to dig in and grow." The lead judge checked her watch, making a final note. "Thank you, gentlemen. We'll announce our decision this afternoon." As they gathered their equipment, Walter noticed something on one of the scoring sheets. A single word circled multiple times: legacy. Outside the conference room, Eli let out a long breath. "Think we showed them?" he asked. Walter smiled, remembering Eleanor's words about possibility growing from challenge. "Reckon we showed them exactly who we are. Now we just have to trust that's enough." The first premium produce order from Whole Foods sat on their kitchen table next to the Agricultural Innovation Awards Golden Trophy. Afternoon light streamed through the window, catching both objects, making them glow like harvest wheat. Walter studied the contract's details for the 10th time, still half believing it was real. 5,000 units per month, he read aloud. Certified organic, accessibility-sourced vegetables for their Mid-Atlantic distribution center. He looked up at Eli, who was updating their farm management app to handle the increased production schedule. "When you said winning the competition would open doors, I didn't expect them to swing this wide." "It's not just the award," Eli said, his voice confident now after months of speech therapy and daily practice. Their regional manager was in the audience. Said her brother lost mobility after an accident last year, had to sell his farm. He gestured to the contract. "She wants us to help set up a network of accessible farms across the region, train other farmers in our methods." The trophy caught another ray of sunlight, sending ribbons of gold dancing across their planning documents. First place had seemed impossible when they'd stood before the judges, competing against corporate farms with million-dollar budgets. But something about their presentation had resonated. The practical solutions, the community impact, the story of transformation that went beyond mere technology. "Local news crew will be here tomorrow," Walter reminded him, checking their increasingly crowded calendar. Since the competition, their quiet farm had become a hub of activity. "They want to film the veterans training program." Eli nodded, pulling up footage from their last accessible farming workshop. The screen showed former soldiers learning to use their modified equipment, finding new purpose in the ancient rhythms of agriculture. Already have 6 more groups signed up. VA hospitals from 3 states wanting to start similar programs. A notification pinged on Eli's laptop. Another order, this time from a high-end restaurant collective in Philadelphia. They'd been flooded with interest since the Modern Farming Quarterly article had hit newsstands, their story of innovation and adaptation capturing imaginations across the industry. "Bank called again," Walter said, sorting through their morning mail. "Want to discuss expanding our line of credit. Seems winning a national award changes their tune about foreclosure risks." He chuckled, remembering the loan officer's shocked expression when they'd presented their new business projections. "Speaking of expansion," Eli wheeled to the window, gesturing toward their east field. "The Anderson place next door. Martha said she's willing to sell. 20 acres, good irrigation potential." He turned back to Walter, eyes bright with possibility. "Could double our production capacity, add more teaching spaces." Walter joined him at the window, seeing the neighboring field through new eyes. Where others might see challenges, the uneven ground, the old equipment barn, the overgrown paths, they saw opportunity. Another chance to prove that limitations were just problems waiting for solutions. Martha's husband used to say that land had the best soil in the county, Walter mused. Been fallow since he passed, but with our organic methods, some adaptive modifications. Already worked up some plans, Eli admitted, pulling up a detailed proposal on his laptop. Could set up an accessible orchard on the north slope. Build a real classroom space for workshops. Maybe even, he hesitated, then continued, maybe even start a residential training program for farmers learning to adapt after injuries or illness. Walter studied the plans, recognizing Eleanor's influence in their ambition. She'd always said the farm's real crop was possibility. Now, watching Eli confidently outline their future, he saw how right she'd been. The afternoon sun warm on their backs, they reviewed the expansion plans together. The trophy gleamed forgotten on the table as they focused on more important measures of success. Lives changed, hope restored, barriers broken. Their competition presentation had ended with a quote from Eleanor's journal. True innovation isn't about replacing the old with the new, but about building bridges between what was and what could be. A truck pulled into their driveway, the first delivery of new adaptive equipment for their expanded workshop program. Through the window, Walter watched their regular volunteers begin unloading, each one a testament to the community they'd built. Former students now taught alongside them, sharing their own stories of adaptation and renewal. You know, Walter said quietly, your grandmother always said a farm's real harvest isn't measured in crops alone. Eli looked up from his laptop, understanding in his eyes. It's measured in growth, he finished, in all its forms. The premium produce order and competition trophy shared space on their kitchen table, symbols of recognition and opportunity. But the real rewards were visible through their window, in the accessible paths connecting field to field, in the modified tools enabling new farmers to work the land, in the bridges they'd built between limitation and possibility. Their first harvest had just begun. The new farm sign caught the morning light, its fresh paint gleaming. Miller Family Farm, Adaptive Agriculture and Education Center. Sarah's moving van kicked up dust as it pulled into the driveway, passing under the sign that represented so much more than just a name change. 1 year to the day since she'd first brought Eli here, hoping against hope that somehow this place could help heal her silent, angry son. Need a hand with those boxes? Eli called from the porch, his voice strong and clear. He wheeled down the ramp they'd built together, now weathered to match the farmhouse's natural wood. The modified tool belt at his side held both traditional farming implements and the tablet he used to manage their growing operation. Sarah paused in the act of unloading, taking in the sight of her son. Gone was the defeated teenager who'd arrived, here 12 months ago. In his place sat a young man with purpose in his eyes and dirt under his fingernails, someone who had found not just a place to heal, but a calling to pursue. Still can't believe you're really doing this, Eli said, accepting a box of books to balance on his lap. Leaving your physical therapy practice in the city, practice can move, Sarah replied, smiling. Besides, you two need someone to handle the medical oversight for the rehabilitation programs. VA paperwork doesn't file itself. Walter emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. The past year had straightened his spine, put new energy in his step. Running an educational center alongside their farming operation had awakened something. In him, the teacher he'd never known he could be. Got the apartment over the new classroom building already, he said, hugging his niece. Eleanor always said that space would be perfect for family someday. He glanced at the barn, recently expanded to include their adaptive farming education center. Course, she probably didn't imagine it had become part of a nationally recognized adaptive agriculture program. They worked together unloading Sarah's belongings, each trip into the apartment, revealing more changes to the farm. Through the windows, they could see the expanded, accessible gardens where their latest group of students practiced with modified tools. The Anderson property next door had been transformed into an adaptive orchard, its paths designed to accommodate wheelchairs and mobility aids of all kinds. Remember when all this was just empty fields? Eli asked, arranging Sarah's medical reference books on their new shelf. Now we've got waiting lists for every program. Sarah paused in her unpacking, picking up a framed photograph she'd brought. Eli, at his first adaptive farming workshop, teaching other wheelchair users how to operate their modified equipment. "I remember when getting you to speak seemed impossible," she said softly. "Now you're giving lectures at agricultural conferences." "Speaking of which," Walter added, carrying in the last box, "that research team from the university called again. They want to do a formal study on our rehabilitation outcomes. Something about groundbreaking integration of agricultural therapy and adaptive technology." Eli wheeled to the apartment's window, looking out over the farm that had become so much more than just land to work. Students moved between the educational gardens, some in wheelchairs, others using various mobility aids, all engaged in the ancient art of helping things grow. Among them walked their regular instructors, old Joe McKinnon teaching adaptive driving techniques for farm equipment, local organic farmers sharing sustainable methods, veterans helping other veterans find new purpose in the soil. "Got the final paperwork this morning?" Walter said, joining him at the window. "Farms officially registered as a non-profit educational center. Board of Directors approved our expanded mission statement." Sarah opened another box, pulling out Eleanor's old journals, now digitized and integrated into their teaching curriculum. "And the accessibility certification? Highest rating they offer," Eli answered proudly. "Said we're setting new standards for adaptive agricultural education." He gestured to where their original wheelchair-height garden box still stood, now surrounded by dozens of others. "Everything we tried here, everything we learned, it's becoming a model for farms across the country." The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the sign that marked their transformation. Sarah watched her son consulting with a group of students, his tablet displaying their custom farm management software, while his hands demonstrated proper tool adaptation techniques. Here was the future she'd desperately hoped for, but couldn't imagine during those dark days after his accident. "Eleanor would have loved this," Walter said quietly, helping Sarah arrange family photos on her new walls. The farm becoming a place of healing, of teaching, of second chances. Through the window, they could hear Eli explaining their latest innovation to an attentive group, a voice that had been silenced now sharing wisdom born of experience. The new farm sign cast its shadow across the educational gardens, marking not an ending, but a continuation. A family legacy growing in ways none of them could have predicted, but all of them had helped cultivate. Sarah placed Eleanor's photograph on the windowsill, angled to watch over the flourishing fields. "She's here," she said simply. "In every adaptive tool, every student's breakthrough, every barrier broken, we're all still growing her dream." Together they stood in the apartment that would complete their circle, watching the farm that had transformed them all continue its vital work. Some harvests, they had learned, yielded more than crops. Some roots grew stronger with each passing season. The college acceptance letter lay open on Eli's desk in the farm's education center, Cornell University's letterhead gleaming in the early morning light. "Agricultural Technology and Adaptive Design," the program description read, "with focus on inclusive farming practices and rehabilitation integration." Below it sat a second document, the board's approval for Eli to develop their teaching curriculum remotely while studying. "They're creating a whole new concentration," Eli explained to Walter as they reviewed the morning's schedule, "based partly on what we've done here." His wheelchair was positioned by the window, giving him a clear view of their newest student arriving in the parking lot, a young woman recently injured in a car accident, her own anger and fear visible, even at a distance. Walter recognized that look. "Reminds me of someone," he said softly. "About a year ago." Eli nodded, watching the girl's mother helping her from the car, seeing his own story reflected in their tentative movements. "Asked for her specifically," he admitted. "When her rehabilitation center contacted us, thought maybe—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe she needs what I needed, a place to grow something new." The education center hummed with morning activity. Through the open door, they could hear Sarah leading the medical orientation for their latest group of veterans. The adaptive equipment workshop echoed with old Joe's voice, explaining their modified tool designs. Every space filled with purpose, with possibility. "Got something to show you," Walter said, gesturing for Eli to follow. They moved through the building that had once been a simple barn, now transformed into a state-of-the-art adaptive farming education facility. Students and instructors called out greetings as they passed, each one part of the growing community they'd built. Behind the main building, in a quiet corner of the teaching garden, Walter stopped. There, freshly installed, stood a bronze plaque set into a natural stone base. Eli wheeled closer, reading the inscription: "The Eleanor Miller Institute for Adaptive Agriculture, where limitations become possibilities, founded 2024 in honor of those who taught us that the greatest growth often comes from the most challenging soil." Below the main text, in smaller letters, special dedication to Eli Miller, whose courage to grow helped plant the seeds of transformation. Eli's hand touched the plaque gently, feeling the raised letters beneath his fingers. "When did you board?" "Approved it last week," Walter said. "Wanted to wait until your acceptance letter came." He smiled, watching the morning sun catch the bronze surface. Seemed fitting, marking one new beginning while celebrating another. A sound behind them made them turn. The new student had wheeled onto the accessible path, her mother hovering uncertainly nearby. Eli straightened in his chair, recognizing his cue. This was why they'd created this place, not just to grow crops, but to cultivate hope. "I'll take it from here," he told the mother gently, just as Walter had once said to Sarah. "Would you like to see our gardens?" he asked the girl, noting how she gripped her wheelchair's arms, knuckles white with tension. "We've got some tomatoes that need planting." Walter watched them move toward the wheelchair-height garden boxes, Eli's voice carrying back fragments of their stories beginning. "I know it feels impossible right now, but let me show you something we built here." The morning breeze carried the scent of growing things, herbs from their medicinal garden, flowers from their sensory therapy plots, vegetables from their production fields. Sarah emerged from the education center, medical charts tucked under, her arm pausing to watch Eli with his new student. "He's really doing it," she said, joining Walter by Eleanor's plaque, "taking everything this place taught him and passing it on." Walter nodded, seeing not just Eli and his student, but the whole tapestry they'd woven, veterans finding peace in the rhythm of seasons, injured farmers reclaiming their connection to the land, families discovering new ways to grow together. Eleanor's dream expanded beyond anything they could have imagined. "Cornell wants to use our program as a model," he said. "Implement it at agricultural schools across the country." He touched the plaque's surface, feeling its permanence. "What? We started here. It's going to keep growing." They stood together in the garden Eleanor had first planted with possibility, watching Eli guide another wounded soul toward healing. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the farm in shades of promise. Somewhere in the distance, a tractor hummed as old Joe taught another student to use their modified controls. Sarah's therapy groups worked in the sensory gardens. Students moved along accessible paths, each one carrying their own story of challenge and change. The college acceptance letter waited on Eli's desk, tomorrow's seeds ready for planting. But the real future grew here, in this moment, in each new student who discovered that limitations were just the beginning, not the end. In each barrier broken, each adaptation created, each life transformed. Some crops, they had learned, yielded harvests beyond measure. Some gardens grew hope itself. Season after season, soul after soul,